I stood in the mahogany boardroom where Thomas Mitchell had once humiliated me, watching his face drain of color as his own daughter, now my wife, slid the termination papers across the table. "Dad, you're being reassigned to consultant," Sophia said coolly. "Kevin will be taking over as COO, effective immediately." 3 years ago, he'd fired me for dating her. Now, we were firing him. My name is Kevin Walsh, and I'm 28 years old. Every morning at 6:30, I walked through the glass doors of Mitchell Industries wearing my best suit, the only good one I owned, carrying a thermos of coffee my mother packed for me the night before. Working-class Irish from South Boston, son of a union electrician and a school secretary. Night school got me my business degree while I worked full-time, climbing from warehouse worker to operations manager through pure stubborn determination. The executives treated me like furniture, invisible, useful when they needed something moved, ignored when decisions got made. But I knew those factory floors better than anyone in a corner office ever would. I understood supply chains, worker productivity, regulatory compliance. The difference between knowing something from a textbook and knowing it from actually doing it every single day for years. That Tuesday morning changed everything. Well, it started changing everything. I was reviewing supply chain reports when Margaret from HR stuck her head in my office. "Kevin, we need you in conference room B, compliance meeting." She looked apologetic. "They need someone who actually knows how the floor operates." Conference room B smelled like expensive cologne and disappointment. 7 executives in suits that cost more than my monthly rent, all looking uncomfortable about regulations they'd never bothered to understand. Then there was her. Sophia Mitchell sat at the far end of the table, legal pad covered in notes, asking questions that actually made sense. She was 26, sharp as a blade, and treating everyone in that room like they had functioning brains. Even me. "Kevin," she said, looking up from her notes, "walk me through the quality control checkpoints for the automotive parts division." Nobody had asked me to walk them through anything in months. Usually they just told me what to implement. I explained the 3-stage inspection process, the documentation requirements, the supplier verification protocols. She listened, actually listened, taking notes, asking follow-up questions about timing and personnel training. The other executives stared at their phones. "That's exactly what I needed," she said after I finished. "These regulatory changes are going to require modifications to your current process, but nothing you can't handle with the right documentation updates." She treated me like I knew what I was talking about, because I did. After the meeting, she caught up with me in the hallway. "Would you mind grabbing coffee sometime this week? I'd love to pick your brain about operational efficiency and compliance integration." My brain? Someone wanted to pick my brain? Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into dinner. Sophia revealed her frustration with corporate politics, how executives made decisions without understanding their real-world impact. I showed her my strategic thinking went way beyond my blue-collar exterior. She was brilliant, not just book-smart, but genuinely curious about how things actually worked. And funny. She laughed at my stories about warehouse mishaps and executive cluelessness. I made her laugh until she snorted, then laughed harder at herself for snorting. 3 weeks in, during our 4th dinner together, she mentioned her last name almost casually. My father gets frustrated when lawyers question his business decisions. Mitchell, Sophia Mitchell. The CEO's daughter was asking me about supply chain optimization while sharing my cheap Chinese takeout. I should have run. Any sane person would have run. Dating the boss's daughter never ends well, especially when you're the guy who started in the warehouse. But Sophia wasn't just the boss's daughter. She was smart, kind, and saw me as more than my job title or my background. Plus, she paid for dinner half the time, which my budget appreciated. 6 months later, we were falling in love. Neither of us mentioned the obvious problem brewing on the horizon. Thomas Mitchell had built his empire on control, and he was about to discover his daughter was dating the help. Thomas Mitchell discovered our relationship on a Thursday. I know, because that's when my life turned into a masterclass in corporate psychological warfare. The man had built Mitchell Industries from his father's small manufacturing business into a multi-million-dollar operation. Control wasn't just his management style, it was his religion. And I had just committed the ultimate heresy by dating his daughter without permission. The first strike came disguised as a promotion. "Kevin, we're sending you to Detroit," Thomas announced during the Monday morning staff meeting. His smile looked like it belonged on a shark. Our facility there needs some hands-on attention. Everyone in that room knew what Detroit meant. The facility was hemorrhaging money, union relations were toxic, and the previous 3 managers had quit within 6 months. It was corporate exile dressed up as opportunity. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table. She knew exactly what her father was doing. Detroit was supposed to break me. Instead, I spent 3 months learning every worker's name, understanding their grievances, and implementing changes that actually made sense. Production increased 20%. Worker complaints dropped to almost 0. I turned that disaster into a success story. Thomas was not pleased. "Congratulations on Detroit," he said when I returned, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Now, let's see how you handle customer service." Customer service meant fielding complaints about defective products Thomas refused to recall. Products I'd flagged as problematic months earlier. He was literally making me clean up messes he'd created, while knowing I couldn't fix the root cause. But here's what Thomas underestimated. My warehouse background had taught me something crucial. When you can't solve the problem, you take care of the person with the problem. I spent hours on calls with frustrated customers, explaining what we could do, offering alternatives, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. Our customer retention improved. Thomas looked constipated every time someone mentioned it. Then came the meeting exclusions. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to planning sessions for projects I'd be implementing. I'd show up Monday morning to find decisions made over the weekend, strategies developed without input from the guy who'd actually have to execute them. Other managers started avoiding me in hallways. They could smell the political poison. The public humiliation started small, little comments during staff meetings that made everyone uncomfortable except Thomas. "Perhaps Kevin can explain this to those of us who attended actual business school," he'd say with that shark smile. "I'm sure Kevin's street-smart perspective will be enlightening here." Each comment landed like a tiny knife, designed to remind everyone in the room that I didn't belong, that I was different, lesser. The weird part is how quiet those meetings became after his comments. 20 executives suddenly finding their coffee cups fascinating. Nobody wanted to catch whatever disease I apparently had. Sophia witnessed one of these sessions and confronted her father that evening. She told me later he'd gone ballistic, threatening to cut her off completely if she didn't come to her senses about that boy. That boy. I was 28 years old with a business degree and 3 years of exemplary performance reviews. Then Thomas got creative. He scheduled me for overlapping assignments in different cities. Chicago on Tuesday, Atlanta on Wednesday, back to Chicago on Thursday. When I pointed out the impossibility, he'd look concerned and suggest I work on my time management skills. "Kevin seems to be struggling with basic scheduling," he announced during one particularly humiliating staff meeting. "Perhaps we need to reconsider his current responsibilities." The stress was killing Sophia and me. She felt guilty for destroying my career. I felt guilty for damaging her family relationships. We were both drowning in guilt while Thomas stood on the shore, watching us struggle, but we didn't break. That seemed to infuriate him more than anything. The nephew situation nearly finished me. Thomas assigned me to mentor his sister's kid, Bradley, a 25-year-old MBA with the work ethic of a spoiled house cat and the business acumen of a goldfish. Every project Bradley touched turned to garbage, and somehow that became my fault. "Kevin's mentoring clearly isn't effective," Thomas would announce whenever Bradley screwed up another assignment. "We might need someone with better leadership skills." 6 months into his campaign, Thomas called me to his office for a private conversation. The offer was simple and disgusting: $50,000 to disappear from Sophia's life. Clean break, good references, everybody wins. "She'll thank you eventually," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like some discount godfather. "This infatuation will pass, but the damage to her future won't. You're holding her back from the life she deserves." Makes sense, right? Poor kid should know his place. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, standing up slowly, "Sophia makes her own choices. She doesn't need you or me deciding what's best for her." His mask finally dropped completely. The fake concern vanished, replaced by pure contempt. "You actually think you're good enough for her." His voice was ice cold. "You think your little warehouse-to-manager story makes you special. But you're still just the help, Kevin, and I'm going to remind everyone of that. The final trap was beautifully crafted. Thomas assigned me to present a supply chain optimization proposal to the board, a proposal they'd already rejected in a secret meeting I wasn't invited to. He knew I'd spend weeks preparing, knew I'd deliver it professionally, knew it would fail spectacularly. I walked into that boardroom with charts, projections, and detailed implementation timelines. 20 minutes of solid presentation covering cost savings, efficiency improvements, and risk mitigation strategies. Then Thomas dismantled it piece by piece. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that's been holding us back," he announced to the board. "Unrealistic projections, poor understanding of market conditions, and, frankly, an unprofessional attitude toward constructive criticism. Unprofessional attitude." I'd said exactly 12 words during his critique. "I'd be happy to address any specific concerns you have." Unfortunately, Kevin's performance has been deteriorating for months. Missed deadlines, poor communication, inability to work with team members effectively. Every word was technically defensible and completely untrue. Months of careful documentation had given him cover for character assassination. Effective immediately, we're terminating Kevin's employment due to attitude problems and unprofessional behavior. I cleaned out my desk while security watched. 3 years of exemplary reviews meant nothing. Thomas Mitchell had won. Well, he thought he had won. But the man made one crucial mistake in his campaign to destroy me. He focused so hard on breaking me down that he forgot about building his daughter up. Sophia had been watching, learning, and planning her own moves while her father played his little games. The real war was just beginning, and Thomas had no idea what was coming for him. 3 years later, I stood in that same mahogany boardroom watching Thomas Mitchell's world collapse around him. But getting there, that was the hard part nobody talks about in revenge fantasies. After my firing, Sophia made her choice. She walked away from her trust fund, her family connections, her entire safety net. For me. The guilt nearly killed me some nights. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Southie that smelled like the fish market downstairs. Sophia studied for the bar exam at our kitchen table, while I built my consulting business from scratch. Some evenings, we'd sit there eating ramen noodles, wondering if we'd made the biggest mistake of our lives. But here's what Thomas never understood about either of us. We weren't quitters. My blue-collar background became my secret weapon. While other consultants talked theory, I knew factory floors. I understood why production lines failed, how to actually motivate workers, what suppliers really meant when they promised flexibility. The companies I'd worked with during my Mitchell Industries days started hiring me. Turns out, people remember competence. Sophia landed at a small but prestigious law firm, specializing in the corporate compliance. Her bosses quickly realized they had hired someone who understood both legal theory and business reality. She wasn't just another lawyer. She was a translator between boardrooms and courtrooms. Meanwhile, Thomas was discovering what happens when you fire the guy who actually kept things running. Mitchell Industries started experiencing mysterious supply chain failures. Regulatory violations piled up. Customer complaints spiked. The automotive division lost 2 major contracts after quality control disasters I could have prevented in my sleep. Thomas's response? Blame everyone except himself. He hired 3 different operations managers in 2 years. Each one lasted about 6 months before realizing they had inherited an unfixable mess. The company culture had turned toxic under Thomas's authoritarian style. Workers filed discrimination lawsuits. The state launched regulatory investigations. Stock prices dropped like a rock. The board started asking uncomfortable questions about leadership and long-term strategy. Thomas had built his reputation on control, but control doesn't mean much when everything's falling apart. Then Sophia got the call. "The board wants you back," Margaret from HR explained during their lunch meeting. "Chief Legal Officer position, full authority over legal affairs and compliance." Sophia's condition was simple. Thomas steps down as CEO, moves to consultant role, takes direction from new leadership. The board was desperate enough to agree. Her first official act? Hiring me as Chief Operating Officer. The morning we walked back into Mitchell Industries together felt surreal. Same building, same elevators, same conference rooms. But everything had changed. Employees who'd once avoided me now sought my advice. Executives who'd treated me like furniture suddenly wanted lunch meetings. Thomas looked like he'd aged 10 years. His hair had gone completely gray. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the nervous energy of a man who'd lost control of his own kingdom. That first board meeting was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Kevin will be implementing supply chain reforms over the next 90 days, Sophia announced to the room. All department heads will coordinate through him for operational changes. Thomas sat in his new designated chair, not at the head of the table anymore, watching his daughter give orders to executives who used to report to him. When he tried to interrupt with suggestions, board members politely redirected him to discuss ideas with Kevin or Sophia first. The man who'd once wielded absolute power was now asking permission to speak in his own company. Within 6 months, we'd stabilized operations and resolved most legal issues. Customer confidence returned, stock prices recovered. The company Thomas nearly destroyed through pride and prejudice was thriving again under the leadership of the two people he'd tried to break. But the real victory came 3 weeks ago, when our wedding announcement appeared in the company newsletter. Former enemies now running the company together, while Thomas's legacy crumbled into irrelevance. Justice tastes sweeter when served with a side of professional competence and a happy marriage. Thomas tried one last power play during our third board meeting back. He stood up during my operational report, that old authoritative voice returning for a moment. I think we need to reconsider these changes. Kevin's approach is too aggressive, too risky for a company with our heritage. The room went silent, same kind of silence from 3 years ago, but different. Back then, people stayed quiet out of fear. Now they were embarrassed for him. Board Chairman Robert Chen cleared his throat. Thomas, we've discussed this. Operational decisions go through Kevin now. Thomas's face flushed red. This is still my company. I built this place from... Dad, Sophia's voice cut through his speech like ice. You're out of order. Out of order. In his own boardroom. He sat down heavily, looking around the table for support that wasn't coming. These same executives who'd nodded along with his cruelty now treated him like that uncle who tells inappropriate stories at family dinners. Tolerated, but irrelevant. The numbers told the real story. 6 months after our return, productivity was up 30%. Customer complaints dropped to record lows. We'd hired back half the good people Thomas had driven away, including 3 supervisors who'd quit rather than implement his impossible demands. Most importantly, people smiled at work again. The fear-based culture Thomas created was dying, replaced by something that actually functioned. Sophia and I were reviewing quarterly reports in my office when Margaret knocked on our door. Kevin, Thomas is here to see you. He stood in my doorway like a broken man. The swagger was gone completely. His expensive suit hung loose on a frame that seemed smaller than I remembered. Kevin, his voice was barely above a whisper. I wanted to apologize. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where he'd offered me $50,000 to disappear. I was wrong, he continued, staring at his hands. About you, about Sophia, about everything. Part of me wanted to savor this moment. The mighty Thomas Mitchell admitting defeat to the warehouse kid he'd tried to destroy. But honestly, he just looked pathetic. We're doing fine, Thomas, I said quietly. The company's doing fine too. He nodded and left without another word. Later that evening, Sophia and I walked past that mahogany boardroom where this whole story started. She squeezed my hand and smiled. No regrets? She asked. I thought about everything we'd been through, the humiliation, the struggle, the nights eating ramen and wondering if we'd make it. None, I said, though I still can't believe you married a guy from Southie. She laughed. Best decision I ever made. Some stories end with explosions and dramatic confrontations. Ours ended with competence, love, and Thomas Mitchell learning that treating people decently isn't just morally right, it's good business. The warehouse kid won after all.